Welcome to The Explainer. When you think about how countries get what they want on the world stage, what comes to mind? Probably armies, maybe treaties, right? Well, it's so much more than that. Today, we're going to crack open the global toolbox and take a look at the surprising and sometimes invisible instruments nations use to shape our world. So, let's start with a little riddle to get us thinking. What could legendary jazz music, a huge animated blockbuster movie, and the FIFA World Cup possibly have in common? On the surface, they're from totally different worlds. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll find they share this really powerful, surprising connection.
And the answer is they are all incredibly powerful tools in the world of foreign policy. See, this whole game isn't just for politicians arguing in stuffy closed-door meetings. It's a massive global contest for influence, and it uses culture and money and power in ways that, believe it or not, affect every single one of us every single day.
So that's what we're doing today. We are going to explore the key instruments that countries pull out of their toolbox to get things done on the world stage, from the most subtle forms of persuasion to the most direct displays of power. Okay, let's dive right in. All right, here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at the power of attraction. Then, we'll get into the power of the wallet. After that, we'll dig into the power of rules. And finally, we'll see how it all comes together in the global toolbox. First up, let's talk about the magnet in the toolbox. This is all about the art of winning hearts and minds, influencing others through sheer appeal, not by twisting their arm. There's a name for this. It's called soft power. The political scientist Joseph Nye came up with it, and it's basically the ability to get other countries to want the same things you want. It's not about force, it's about making your culture, your values, your policies so attractive that other people just naturally want to follow your lead. And this quote, man, it just nails it. Back in the Cold War, the U.S. State Department literally sent jazz legends like Dizzy Gillespie and Louis Armstrong on tours around the world. Think about it. By sending these incredible mixed-race bands out to play together, they were projecting this powerful image of cultural vibrancy and racial harmony, a direct shot at Soviet propaganda about American racism. And this is not some dusty Cold War tactic, right? Fast forward to today, and look at how this strategy has evolved. You've got China flexing its cultural muscle with animated blockbusters like Ninja 2, which isn't just big at home, it's crushing global box office records, going head-to-head with Hollywood. And then you have South Korea's Korean wave. K-pop, K-dramas, video games, it's a cultural tsunami that has become a truly global phenomenon. But there is a flip side to this. Using culture isn't always a clean win. When a country with, let's say, a questionable human rights record decides to host a massive sporting event, it can lead to accusations of sports washing, basically using the glitz and glamour of sports to scrub away a negative reputation. The 2022 World Cup in Qatar is a textbook example of this. Yes, it put the nation on the world stage, but it also put a giant, uncomfortable spotlight on its controversial kafala labor system. Suddenly, millions of people who had probably never even heard of it were exposed to the issue. It just goes to show you how soft power can sometimes backfire. Big time. Okay, so attraction has its limits. That brings us to the next tool in the box, one that's a whole lot more direct. Now we are talking about money. Using economic levers to reward your friends and put the squeeze on your rivals. This is what we call economic statecraft. It's the strategic use of financial tools. We're talking foreign aid, sanctions, big trade deals, all to push your foreign policy agenda. And let's be clear, it's not just about economics, it's about power. And this really boils down to two approaches. You've got the carrot and the stick. The stick is all about coercion. Think sanctions used to punish a country for its behavior, like the heavy sanctions the U.S. put on Iran to try and stop its nuclear program. And then you've got the carrot, which is attraction. This is when you use things like foreign aid or sweet trade deals to build partnerships and encourage cooperation. And if you want to see this in action on a truly mind-boggling scale, look no further than China's Belt and Road Initiative. This thing is a massive, global strategy, funding huge infrastructure projects in over 150 countries. The goal? To create new markets for Chinese companies and lock down access to natural resources. This initiative really sets up a fascinating clash of models. On one side, you have Western institutions like the World Bank. They often attach conditions to their loans, things like democratic reforms or human rights standards. On the other side, you have China, which often promotes its loans as having no strings attached when it comes to a country's internal politics. And this has led to some serious accusations of debt trap diplomacy. Critics say China is using unsustainable loans to gain leverage over these nations. All right, let's get into the final compartment of our toolbox. This is where things get really serious. We're talking about the most traditional and often the most direct instruments of influence. This is the power of rules and force, what's often called hard power, and it relies on laws, diplomacy, and when it comes down to it, military might. First off, you've got domestic rules. Before a country can even act on the world stage, it has to look at its own rule book. The US Constitution is a great example. It deliberately splits foreign policy powers between the president and Congress, creating this whole system of checks and balances. And then, of course, you zoom out from the national level, and you have the international rules of the game. Landmark agreements like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. This sets the rules of the road for the entire global community. In this case, it's a desperate attempt to contain the world's most destructive weapons. But what happens when the rules aren't enough? Well, then there's force. And this is where things can get really complicated. A crucial thing to understand is how a single law can be stretched and reinterpreted over decades. Just look at the 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force, or AOMF. It was passed right after 9/11 to go after the perpetrators. But that same authorization was later used to justify the Guantanamo Bay detention camp, then strikes against ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and even strikes against the Syrian government. All of these were actions taken against enemies that didn't even exist back in 2001. Of course, even in this super serious world of diplomacy and hard power, you still get these moments that are just kind of funny. In a now famous gaffe, the US presented Russia with this symbolic reset button. The only problem? The Russian translation on it was wrong. It didn't say reset, it said overload. A small mistake, maybe, but one with a whole lot of symbolic meaning. Okay, so we've looked at the magnet, we've looked at the wallet, and we've looked at the rulebook and the sword. So how does this all work together? So what's the big takeaway here? It's that a nation's true power isn't just about having the biggest army or the richest economy. Real influence is a complex cocktail. The most effective countries on the world stage, they don't just rely on one tool. They skillfully blend the magnet of soft power, the leverage of economic statecraft, and the weight of hard power. Political scientists have a term for this. They call it smart power. And that really leaves us with one final big question to think about. In our world today, which is so hyper-connected by social media, but at the same time so deeply divided by things like trade wars, which tool in this global box is going to define the next decade? Will it be cultural attraction, economic competition, or will it come down to the hard lines of military and diplomatic rules? The answer to that, well, that's going to define the world we all live in.